All right, and what we're going to start off talking about today is the input path and the monitor path, and just kind of talking about what a large format console is and what it's for. Now, everybody knows about mixing boards, and a mixing board is what you need a mixer if you have more than one instrument coming in and you want to play multiple instruments at the same time. You need a way to mix all that stuff together to get all the sounds combined into one sound that you can feed out to your stereo speakers. It doesn't work really well if you're trying to make music and you have to keep plugging your headphones or your speaker cables into each separate instrument at a different time to listen to it, because you're not going to be able to hear everything at once. You're just going to hear that one instrument at a time. So what we use a mixer for is to have multiple instruments, keyboards, vocals, drums, guitars, basses, things like that, multiple things playing at the same time. So that's really what we want to do with a mixing board. And it's as simple as that. It's, some people kind of feel like it gets more complicated or whatever, and it doesn't. It's just as simple as you're going to mix your guitar and your keyboard and your drums and your vocals and all that stuff together. On a mixer, you'll also see EQs. And the reason why we EQ is so we can stop frequencies from conflicting together. So if I've got like a bass guitar and I've got a piano, the piano has a lot of frequencies. It's got all the high frequencies, all the low frequencies. It's got all the frequencies in there. And with a bass guitar, it's got a lot of low frequencies. It's got some high frequencies too, but it's mostly low frequencies. So if we've got, let's say this is the low and this is the high, if we've got all our low frequencies are mashing up together down here. We got the bass and we got the piano playing and they're right on top of each other. Well, that's not going to sound great because all those frequencies are going to be a mishmash of mud and just, overlapping each other. So what we would do in that case is we would take out the low frequencies from the piano part so the bass can kind of come through there. So we can hear the bass come through and we get the low frequencies of the piano. And that's really what we're doing with an EQ. So you'll see, the mixing desk lets all the instruments sit together and play together. And then the EQ on the mixing desk will help us to adjust frequencies so we can hear everything nice and clearly. And that's really what we're doing with these things. And that's it really. It's as simple as that. A lot of people, they look at a mixing desk and they think, wow, there's so many knobs and there's so many buttons and there's all this stuff in there and it gets really confusing. But I want to tell you, don't let it get confusing. Don't get confused by it. Just think like, oh, okay, this isn't so much. It's just a row of buttons, row of knobs, and everything has its place. And it's not quite as hard as our brain makes it out to be. Our brain kind of goes into overload mode. It's like, wow, too many things. But if you just kind of take a breath. Remember what we talked about last week? We talked about think, look, execute. Remember, think, look, execute. You just take a breath. Just slow down. Okay, what do I want to do? I want to turn up my drums. Okay, that's think. What do I want to do? Look, where's my drums? Where's the position of things? Okay, execute. Turn them up, turn them down, something like that. So that's really all we're doing here. That's really all we're doing here is we're just kind of making sure that things sound nice, okay? So that's the basics of a mixing desk. Well, when we're recording sounds, we have two things happening. We've got to hear the recording path, and we also want to hear the monitor path. Now, the recording path is the signal coming from our musician. It's what's coming in from our music player, whoever, playing, singing, or playing drums or guitars or whatever. That's the signal coming from them, is our recording path. Right? And then that signal comes into the mixer and we can EQ it if we want. We don't have to. And that signal goes from the mixer into the computer and we're going to record in the computer. Now, if you're recording some other way, you could record on a multi-track tape machine. You could record into a digital recorder. You can record into your computer. It's all the same thing. And that's what we call our MTR, our multi-track recorder. Something that allows us to record multiple tracks at the same time and play them back. So when we record the multiple tracks at the same time on our multi-track recorder, that's where the recording happens right there. But what we want to do is we actually want to listen to it after the recorder because we want to make sure that there's no problems with the signal path. Now, if we think about it, if we look at my picture here on my screen, where could the problems happen? Well, we could have a problem that happens here between the source, which is the microphone, and our mixer. Like this cable could be bad. Okay. Now, if the cable is bad from our microphone to our mixer, we're going to notice that pretty immediately because our microphone sound is not going to sound good. It might be crackling, stuff like that. So we're going to notice that if we're listening to the recording path. But what if the cable is bad from my mixer to my recorder? If I'm listening on my mixer here, and you can see where everything is in the signal flow, it starts off with the person singing here, it goes into the microphone, goes down here through the cable, and then it goes into our mixing console, and we're hearing the mixing console here on the recording path. But after that, this is not where it records, it's recording after that into the computer. So if the cable here is bad going into the computer, that's going to cause us problems as well. So we need to listen to the signal after the recording device. That's called the monitor path. The monitor path does not affect the recording at all. The monitor path only affects it only is just for us to listen to. It doesn't affect the recording. It's just the recording is everything from the source into our DAW. But we want to listen to it after that because we want to make sure there's no problems with the cables here or anything like that. So in order to do that, we have another mixing console where we can listen to everything all at once, because even though we're coming out of the computer, we want to hear everything that's happening. And so we have another mixing console right there. And that's what we call the monitor path. So if we look here, we've got two things going on here. We've got our recording path, which is our input path here. That's this one over here in the red box. And then over here is our monitor path, which is what we're listening to. And that's like written down up here. The input path feeds the signal into the recorder, and the monitor path is what we listen to make sure there are no problems with the recorder. Okay. Now, with our modern day consoles, they've made them, more, technologically advanced and stuff like that. This has been going on for a while now, actually, since like the 70s. And so these consoles have more faders on them. And so we can combine all this into one unit here. We don't need to have two separate consoles happening in our studio. That's just going to take up too much space. So these here are combined into one unit right there. All right, so let's go over here. Okay, so remember the input path is the path from the source to the recorder, and the monitor path is the path from the recorder to the speakers, and that's what we listen to. So there's two types of consoles here. There's a split channel console, and there's the there's the inline console. So the split channel console here and the inline console. The split channel console is what you already learned about when you learned about the Mackie 1604. And I know you didn't get a chance to go into school and put your hands on it yet, but that's what we are using with the Mackie 1604. It's a split channel console. What that means is it just has a separate channel for like the input path and the monitor path are all on separate channels. Most consumer boards fall into this category, and consumer, I mean anything up to about like maybe $2,000 or so, or $3,000 are generally considered consumer models. And once you get up above that, you're getting to more professional level stuff. Although, a mixing console that costs $1,000 or $2,000 or something is still fine for professional use, but they're just a little bit, they might not have as many bells and whistles, or might not have as many routing pathways. So on this channel example here, we have an 8-channel mixer. You can see that right here, 8-channel mixer. And on this half over here, we might have the input path, and over here we'd have the monitor path. So we've got the input path here and the monitor path. And so these first 4 channels here would be our input path, which would go to our recorder. And over here we've got the monitor path, which is what we would listen to. Now what this means is that this 8-channel console really only can record 4 things at the same time. So we can record the vocals, the guitars, the bass, and in this case, a kazoo, because every good band needs a kazoo. So we got the input path here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the monitor path here, 5, 6, 7, and 8. When you're recording, you only listen to these channels here. All right. Now the inline console is different. It's basically the same, but it's just the layout is a bit different here. And so we have the input path and the monitor path on the same channel. So when we're listening to this, when we see this here, we've got 8 channels here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But the input path is above the monitor path. So you can see here there's a line of faders here for the input path and a line of faders here for the monitor path. And again, it works the same way. When we're recording, we're only going to listen to the monitor path. We're not going to listen to the input path. The whole point of having an inline console is to save space. All right, you have to have twice as many channels. Let's see. You have to have twice as many channels, or so you can have twice as many channels in the same space. So we can see here, over here, this one here and this one here can be the same size, but instead of being longer to have more channels, we can just make it the same size, and it just has it's a little bit deeper. So you'll find that these inline consoles might be a bit deeper more than wider. And it basically means we've got 2 sets of inputs on it. We've got the input path and we've got the monitor path. And so 1 through 8 can be recording and monitoring all at the same time. And that's really the only reason why we have an inline console. I used to think that these things were a lot more complicated than they were until I actually learned how to use them. And I was like, wow, that's actually not that bad. If you think about it, it's really, once you learn how to do it, it's not quite as crazy as it looks initially. The first time I ever saw a mixing console, I was like, whoa, that thing is like the Starship Enterprise or something like that. It's like a spaceship. It's got all these knobs and faders and things. But they're really just doing the same thing. It's like the same thing over and over and over again. And I hope you can really understand that, because it's going to make it less intimidating and less scary when you're learning how to use it. All right, continuing on here. So let's just talk a little bit about some of the vocabulary we're going to see in the next few days. One of the main things is the multi-track recorder. That is the MTR, the multi-track recorder. And this is a generic term for all devices that can record multiple tracks at the same time. So anything that can record on multiple tracks at the same time is an MTR. This goes into the DAW. In our case, it goes into the MTR can be a DAW, it can also be a tape machine. We're going to talk about that here in just a second. But the DAW stands for Digital Audio Workstation. This is like Pro Tools, Logic, Live, etc. Remember, the DAW needs a computer and an audio interface. The DAW is not one thing. It's not just Pro Tools, Logic, or Live. I mean, it is that, but you really need multiple pieces of this puzzle if you want to be a full multi-track recorder. If you're just making beats at home and you're not really recording multiple tracks, then you don't really need the audio interface to be a special box. But if you want to record multiple tracks at the same time, you need your audio interface to be this special box. So you need an audio interface. You need also, of course, the computer, which is what it's going to live on. As I said earlier, these days they are making some DAWs for the iPad and iPhones and stuff like that. So James says, are we also going to learn how to use a DAW mixer? Well, a DAW mixer is exactly the same as a regular mixer. So yes, I mean, that's what Pro Tools is, and that's what you started learning last week. Pro Tools is a DAW, and we were, your first homework assignment was to make a mix. So you've already started learning it, all right? So the main constraint for how many tracks we can record simultaneously is our audio interface. So for example, if I have a singer, a bass player, and a guitar player, that's only 3 people. So that's just 3 things I need to record at the same time. In that case, I can have an audio interface that just has 3 or 4 inputs. Not a big deal. It's, a lot of audio interfaces have 3 or 4 inputs. But if I have drums, let's say I have drums and I have like 5 channels of drums, plus I've got my guitar, my bass, and my vocals, that's now 8 channels. So then I need a bigger audio interface. Your DAW can record pretty much almost unlimited tracks. You can record on Pro Tools, the limit I think is like 64 or 128 or something like that simultaneously. That's a lot at the same time, right? our constraint is not in the computer. The constraint is in the audio interface. So the audio interface, that's the one that's going to cost the most money there. If you want to record a whole bunch of tracks, let's say we wanted to record 16 tracks simultaneously, well, then you need to buy an audio interface that can record 16 microphones or 16 inputs simultaneously. And that can get pretty expensive. You can really spend anywhere from $100 to $4,000 on an audio interface, or even more. If you get into the Pro Tools ecosystem and you get their HD systems, you can get up to $10,000, $15,000 on these things. Now, that's not to say that you need to spend $15,000. I've done a lot of music in my day, made a lot of songs, recorded a lot of things, and I've never had an audio interface I've never used one. I have used them, but I've never owned one that cost $15,000. You don't need to spend that much money. You can get the we can also get we can use these things that cost less. And then Swift says, I don't hear anything. Swift, you're gonna have to maybe restart. All right, so the Adat is a digital recorder. It's an 8-channel recorder. It looks like a VHS cassette. The Adats were popular in the 90s and the 2000s. The Adat was the kind of first digital audio recording device. And then we have an Adat cable, which is an 8-channel digital audio cable that we still use today. We don't really use the Adat recording machines very much anymore. Those are not really widely used, but we do use the cable that was made at the same time. And that's Adat stands for Alesis Digital Audio Tape, made by a company called Alesis. And it was pretty popular in the 90s and early 2000s. You might still see them out in the wild some today, but not too much. But the Adat cable, you're going to see that a lot. And I use them all the time in my home studio for very specific purposes, which we're going to learn about this week. So that's that's an Adat cable. And then we have a multi-track tape machine, which is another type of multi-track recorder. And we have 24 tracks and 2-track versions of those. The 24 track is what you're going to see in studios for multi-track recording. Although, to be honest, you don't really see multi-track tape machines anymore so much. You can run across them, and you might see them sitting in a corner, but it's not something that's used very widely. Just because tape is very expensive and computers are so powerful now and they sound so good that it's not something you need to worry about. Then 2-track machines you will see more often that records 2 channels of tape. So it's something you need to just keep in mind about this. There are 2 different types of multi-track tape machines. There's a 24 track and there's a 2-track, and they're used for different purposes. All right, so let's talk about this input path here. The input path, we've got a few different pieces of this, and it's really important that you actually memorize this. And so we're going to be talking about this a lot over the next week and even going forward into the future, because this is all going to come back when we talk about our O2R as well. So starting off, we've got the source. And the source is something that you might record like your voice or a guitar, drums, keyboard, anything like that. That's the source. And what happens is the sound is transmitted to the mic or DI or through a cable or something like that. The sound is transmitted, that's like generally through the air or through a cable. That mic or DI is patched into the back of the board, which is the mic pre-input. Now, the mic pre-input doesn't have to be the back of the board. It can be a separate box as well. But every mixer has mic pre-inputs. If it's got a mic, if it can take microphones, it has a mic pre-input. And your audio interface also has mic pre-inputs on them as well. But it doesn't have to be straight into the mixer. It can be into a preamp or something like that. Then that's assigned to the channel. And the channel is where you've got your EQs and stuff like that. And that's routed into your group out or your direct out. And it's then patched into the multi-track recorder. So we start off one more time, just going through that one more time. We start off over here with the source, and that's going to travel through the air or through a cable or something like that into the microphone or into a DI box. And then the mic or the DI box. And remember, we talked about the DI box last week when we talked about our cables, stuff like that. So the microphone or the DI box is then patched with a cable into a mic pre-input, and that can be either a separate box, or a lot of times it's just the input on the back of the mixer. And then that's assigned, whatever you plug it into, it's assigning it to the channel. And the channel is where you have your EQ, and you might have compression, you have your faders, stuff like that, your pan left and right. That is in here, and then we route that through the group out or direct outs, and that's handled different way on different boards to get it into our multi-track recorder. So remember, our ultimate destination is the multi-track recorder. That's our ultimate destination, to get that recording going. So the whole point is to get the source, whatever we want to record, from here into our multi-track recorder, whether that's our DAW or a tape machine or an ADAT or something like that, doesn't matter. The point is what we're doing. We're recording the voice into here. So how do we get that in there? So it goes from the source, we get the microphone, goes into the mixer has channels on it, then the mixer, we send that signal out of the mixer into our multi-track recorder. Why do we have the mixer? We have the mixer so we can listen to multiple things at the same time. Okay, so here is our destination right here. This is Pro Tools or something like that. This is where we're doing the final recording here. We also have the monitor path. Remember, we've got two pathways. We've got the input path and we've got the monitor path. The monitor path is what we're listening to. So we need to get the signal out of our DAW into our ears somehow, through the speakers or through our headphones or something like that. So the multi-track recorder, we start off with the multi-track recorder, and that gets patched into our line or tape in, separate input from our mic pre-input. It's still on the board, but this one here is going to be a 1/4 inch input, and it's going to be coming into the board again, but a separate input. Okay, a lot of consoles, they have, well, especially the inline consoles, will have a mic input and a line input that we can use at the same time. Then that is going into a channel on here with our EQ or our fader or something like that, and that's routed into our left-right mix bus. And usually you're going to press a button or something like that to get it routed into the left-right mix bus. Then we can assign that to our control room output, our control room out. And that's where we can go into our speakers. It's hardwired into our speakers. So what happens is we're recording the signal on our multi-track recorder, and that's coming in back in eventually into a channel. And so there's, as you can see, there's two channels here. Let me just skip back here to this input and monitor path here. When we're recording into our DAW, these faders right here are actually going to control the level that's going into our DAW. That's going to control our level that's going into our DAW here. And then what we're listening to again is the monitor path. So if we're listening to it and it's too loud, we don't want to listen. We don't want to hear it. We don't want to turn it down on the input path side of things. We don't want to turn that down. We want to turn it down on the monitor path side of things, because if it's too loud for us to listen to, then we need to turn it down over here on the monitor path, because remember, the monitor path is after the computer, after our recordings. Let's follow the green line here one more time. We've got our source, goes into our microphone, follows the signal around over here into our mixing console. This mixing console has the levels on the faders here. That's controlling how much or how little we're actually recording into our computer here. That's recording the signal into the computer here. And then from here, we're going back into the mixing console. And this place here, we have more faders. So if I'm listening to it, I'm like, you know what? The vocal sounds a little bit loud to me right now. I want to turn it down. Maybe I'll change that later. So we're not going to change the level of the vocal here on the mixing console on the input path. We're going to change it on our monitor path, so we can still record a nice full signal. It's going to be the same signal. We just want to be able to listen to it a little bit softer. We don't want to record it softer. We just want to listen to it softer. So that's what this mixing path, that's what this channel path here is for. Right? So that does that there. And that's on our left-right mix bus. We're going to assign it to our left-right mix bus. The left-right mix bus is our main stereo output. That's the main output that goes into our recording later on. And then that goes into our control room out here. The control room out is what we listen to on our speakers. You usually have like a volume knob or something like that on your speakers. And so that's what our control room out is controlling. It's controlling the level on our speakers here. So if I want to just make it louder or softer on my speakers, I'm not going to do it from the left-right mix bus. And we're going to talk about why a little bit later. What I want to do is I want to control the level on my control room output here, and that's hardwired into the speakers here. So we want to make sure we have all that like that. All right. Okay, so let's just do a quick run through of this stuff here. And let's go here. Let me open up. What I'm going to do is this. I'm going to actually open up the manual here. Go in here and go to Audient. Here's the Audient Manual. And I'm going to show you also your homework assignment. Well, not homework. We're actually going to do it here in class in a bit. I just want to show you what I expect to do with this real quick here. Let's just log into my Canvas. And we're going to do this a little bit sooner than later just because I think it's really important to do this early on rather than waiting for it. So I'm going to go here to my modules. And in the modules, I'm going to go check out my exercise labs here. Audient Channel Strip Worksheet. So what I do is I download the PDF. Here's my PDF. And what you're going to do when you're doing this assignment is we're going to open up the PDF next to the manual. Let's go in here to the manual and just take a look at this stuff. I'm going to go through. I'm just going to skip ahead over here to all this stuff here. And you can read the glossary. I recommend reading the glossary. We're going to go through some of this here in a second. But we need to get over here to the console functions. And so what I'm going to do here is on my PDF, I'm just going to go ahead and open it up. Make sure you open it up in preview. Do not open up your PDF inside of your browser. It's not going to work right if you do that. Open it up in preview or Adobe or something like that. I'm going to just put my name in here, Tony Grund. I'm going to skip ahead in here. I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to look at the pictures, make sure the pictures line up here. And I'm going to go to number 1. I'm going to say, what is this parameter? Well, this is the long meter. Now, it says here 20 segment meter, 3 segment meter, but I'm telling you, this is the long meter. And what does this do? It shows us the level on the monitor path. That's what it does. It shows us the level on the monitor path. And then here, number 2 is the short meter. And this shows us the level on the input path. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to go through this and we're just going to fill in these blanks in here. So we're going to go through right now and just kind of look at a couple of these things, and we're just going to use the manual. But that's what I want you to do with your assignment today is just go through and you're going to label all these things. And so we're just going to go through these real quick right now and look at these here. And I'm going to do it here in the manual because this is a pretty good place to do it. I do have it here in the notes, but as you can see, what happens is I actually didn't fill out all the notes because I want you to use the manual to go through and do this yourself. So number 3 is the insert in. And the insert in, what this does is it turns on your insert for your effects. So for example, if you have like an insert effect like a compressor or an EQ or something like that, a separate EQ like an outboard thing that's not part of the console, your insert's going to insert that into the signal path. We're going to talk about that in more detail. I know that might be pretty confusing, but don't worry, we are going to talk about that more. Number 4 here is the trim control. This is a gain. It makes the signal louder or softer, right? And so that's what I want you to write down. It makes the signal louder or softer. What I don't want you to do, I don't want you to just copy and paste. I don't want you to just go over here and be like, okay, I can just copy this and paste it, and boom, there we go. Like, you could totally do that, but that I'm not gonna, like, I'm gonna not give you full points for that because that's not actually doing the work. You need to be able to learning these things. So that's what this is really for. So the trim control here is our gain, mic pre-gain, trim knob. And that's what's going on there. And that increases the volume level of the mic input. And there you go, that's what that does. Increases the volume level of the mic input. Oh, sorry, number 4 is not, sorry, that's our, not that one, sorry. That's our tape input trim knob. And this is, increases the volume level of the tape return. That's number 4. Number 4, increase the volume level of the tape return. So it says tape here. Now tape, remember, even though we're not using tape, we still talk about things in terms of multi-track tape recorder, multi-track tape. So it's coming back from our tape input. So this is coming back from our computer. This one, you're probably not really gonna use it very much. It's just gonna, like if things are kind of clipping your board coming back for some reason, you might turn it down, or if you got a really hot signal coming out of your Pro Tools or something like that, then it's not going to work. Okay, Joe says that worksheet is locked in Canvas. Oh, right. Sorry about that. These dates were supposed to change. Guess they didn't. Okay, there we go. If you refresh, you should be good now. Go ahead and refresh that and you should be good to download that stuff. And I'll make sure, I guess I'm gonna have to go through and make sure all these are unlocked because it looks like, yeah. Actually, I'm just gonna turn these dates off. There we go. I'm going to push these dates forward. These are supposed to move automatically, but I guess, oh, I know why they didn't move automatically. So there we go. Whoops. So if you go ahead and refresh, that stuff should be open for you. I might go ahead and get rid of this one as well. Change this due date here. Boom, boom. All right. Okay, yeah, that test was available for you. Okay, good. Cool. All right, so there you go. You should be able to have access to those now. All right, so let's just keep going through this here. I'm not going to keep writing them down for you. I'm just going to show here. We're just going to talk about this here. So number 3 is our insert for the effects, which we're going to discuss in more detail later on. Number 4 here is the tape path signal. You're really not going to touch that very much. Basically, it makes the signal louder or softer coming from our tape machine. Number 5 switches between the mic input or the line input. Now on the back of the Audient, let's just go look at this one here. On the back of the Audient, this is what each input looks like. And if we zoom in on this, we can see a couple things that are happening. One, we have this gray area here, which is our input path, and we have the white area here, which is the monitor path. The input path here has a microphone in, it's got a line input as well. It has 2 separate inputs. Now the microphone goes into the mic preamp, and that's for microphones. I mean, it's not complicated. It comes from a microphone. The line input comes from something like a keyboard. So if you have a keyboard that you're playing and you want to get that signal into your board, well, you would go into the line input here. Now, a keyboard has a different level from a microphone. Microphones are much softer than keyboards. Keyboards are already amplified and they're already loud, so when they come out of the keyboard, you'll be able to hear it in a speaker. But a microphone, you need to boost the signal to make it louder so you can hear it better. So that's what our microphone is doing here. The microphone input goes into the preamp. That's what the preamp does. Whereas the line input doesn't need all that. So you actually have a switch that you can switch between to choose if you're going to use the microphone or the input or the it's saying all the assignments for last week are overdue as well. Well, they are overdue because they were due yesterday. T. Yasani says I can't find it. Well, it's in there. Oh, you got it. Okay, cool. And then, like if you're streaming, is that what you set it for? Not sure what you were talking to me about that for. If you're streaming, I don't know what you mean by streaming. I mean, if you're streaming, you would use either one depending on if you're a. Oh, okay, T. We'll figure it out. Yeah, I don't know. Don't worry about it. Don't stress it. Let's talk about that in Zoom. All right, and Cozy Boy. Caden. I don't know with the microphone. If you're streaming, yeah, I mean you'd use the you have to anytime you have a microphone input, you have to put it into the mic input, and then you have to use the gain to turn it up. So and also the mic button has to be in mic position, not line position, because line, what it's going to do is it's just going to switch between those two functions there. So for example, if I wanted to use keyboard, I would push the button in so it's set for line position, which is down, and that means I would be hearing my keyboard sound. But if I wanted to hear my microphone, I would leave it up so I'm hearing the microphone sound. So whichever one you want to use, that's what you push the button for. Now, not all mixers are made like this. Everything is different. So whenever you're using a different mixer, you have to learn how that one's designed. So for example, the Mackie 1604, it's not designed like this. It doesn't have a switch for every single channel. What it does is it has it so when you plug in to the, if you have a microphone plugged in and you plug in a keyboard, the keyboard is going to override the mic signal. So you're no longer going to hear the microphone, you're just going to hear the keyboard. So on the back of the 1604, you cannot have both of them plugged in. You have to have one or the other plugged in. On the on the Audient, however, you can switch between them however you want. So you can, if you have you can have both a microphone and a keyboard plugged in, but then you have to push the button to switch between them. So I hope that answers your question. If you have another question about it, or if it didn't answer your question, let's talk about it in Zoom. Please write down a note about it because it's a little bit hard to go back and forth with typing and talking and typing and talking. So a little bit tricky. But I think I answered your question. I hope I did. So let me know a little bit later on. All right. So getting back into this. Over here we have an MTR button. Now I know I just said MTR stands for multi-track recorder, and that's what it stands for. The abbreviation stands for in the general world of audio. MTR is multi-track recorder, and that can be anything. That's just a generic term for our DAW or tape machine or ADAT or something like that. But in this case, for the Audient, MTR stands for meter. MTR, meter. Just they took out the abbreviations. So they took out the vowels. And what that does is it flips your tape and your microphone meters here, just your input path and your monitor path meters. So remember, the short one here is our input path. This is just 2 little meters. It's pretty much useless for things. So there we go. No, oops. It's pretty much useless for stuff to see what our actual levels are. So what we would do with this is we want to flip them so we can see the input path on our longer meter. So we can see a lot more levels there. So we flip it and then we can see our input path right here. We can see how loud our level is right here on this long meter. That's what this button does here. It switches the two back and forth, boom, boom. So if I'm monitoring, if I'm just mixing from my recording, I would have it just set to default, which is input path here on the long meter and monitor path on the long meter and input path on the mic line. But if I'm if I'm recording, I want to flip that. So I want to have my input path on my long meter and my monitor path here. So that's what this button does. It just flips those back and forth. Number 7 is basically the same as number 3. It's just now it's on our input path instead of our monitor path here. Number 8 is our gain trim knob. So it's our gain control. So if we want to go gain, we want to get the level louder, we use number 8 here to turn up that level coming from our microphone. We can get a hotter signal coming from the microphone. This is where you set it. If you want to, when you're doing your level check and you want to get your microphone a bit louder, you're going to turn the knob for number 8 there and get that to come up in level. Number 9 is our phase flip. So phasing is something that's you should have learned about it a little bit in Mod 1, and you're going to learn about it a lot more in Mod 3. But basically, phasing is when the signal is exactly the same, like it's like you're playing a snare drum or something, but you're capturing the signal from two different microphones that are maybe a little bit further away than each other. What happens is when the phase, when the cycle is exactly the opposite, so you've got the downward curve here and you got the upward curve here, when they're exactly opposite right on top of each other, they're going to cancel each other out and it's going to change the sound. And so we don't want to change the sound. We want to have the sound be the same natural sound. So if you are getting this phase shift, so they're right on top of each other, we want to flip it so that now they're not like that. They're like not like this, they're like this. And that's what 9 can do there. It's not something you're going to need to use all the time. It really is a case by case. And it's going to take a while for you to really understand when to use it. You have to listen really carefully. But that's what number 9 does. It flips the phase for that channel. Number 10 is your phantom power for a condenser microphone, which you learned about in Mod 1. And number 11 is a high-pass filter, which just cuts out the low frequencies. The high-pass filter lets the high frequencies pass through, cuts out the low frequencies. And usually it tells us where the high-pass is, but this one, I think this one does not tell us where that high pass frequency is. I don't remember where it is on the Audient. They're usually like around 70 or 80 hertz frequency. All right, and that's the first page done there. And then we go over here to number 1. The routing switches route the signal to our audio interface. And let's just back up here a second and look at this page here. Where is it? The input path. Here we go. So see, here is our group out or direct out. This routing matrix allows us to send our signal to a different input on our multi-track recorder. So if you're on channel 1 on the desk and you want to come into the multi-track recorder on channel 5, you can push 5. If you want to come into channel 1, you push 1. So this group outs here just changes where we're going to route the signal to. And you can see that here. Select the group outputs that this short fader signal is sent to. Short fader is for our input path. There we go. Short fader is for the input path. Let's go in here. Hold on, let me just get over here. Yeah, okay, cool. All right, number 2 just shifts these numbers here. So we got 1 through 12 is on the top in the white, and 13 through 24 is on the bottom. So you push that shift button down to get to 13 through 24. Then we've got the pan knob if we want to use our routing matrix in pan. So if you're sending it to 2 channels, 1 and 2, or 3 and 4, 5 and 6 like that, you can pan between 1 and 2, or 3 and 4, 5 and 6 using the pan button and the pan knob. And you see how that's all done here. Pan allows the signal to be panned across odd and even groups. Number 4 is our long fader. So this basically takes the signal from the monitor path. By default, the signal is the input path. We want to change that to the monitor path. Now, I just want to point out something about the coloring on the board. On the board we have at school at SAE in New York, the dark background means it's for the input path, and the lighter background means it's for the monitor path. So if you want a quick guide to just to see, glancing at it, how it's set up, the dark background stuff is for the input path by default, although we can change that, and that's what this button does. It changes it so that this now is coming from the monitor path. And you can use that for things like subgrouping drums and stuff like that, which again, we'll talk about later. But by default, it is on the input path. And so we're going to use this for recording into our multi-track recorder. And all this other stuff down here is on the monitor path. That's what this light and dark background means. So we have aux channels here. Number 5 is our aux send amount. Number 6 is the short fader. Number 7 is the pre-fader. And numbers the 7 and 8 here, what this does is it flips it to a different set of aux channels. So once again, the aux channels here are on the monitor path, but if we want to put them on the input path, we can push this SF button. SF stands for short fader. The short fader is our monitor path, our input path. And then we have another set of auxes down here. This is for what we call the foldback mix. Now the foldback mix is for our musicians. It's a headphone mix, so we can have different mixes for different people. So let's say one person wants to hear the vocals louder, one person wants to hear the drums louder. We can do that. We can do it in their headphones. So if my singer wants to hear the vocals nice and loud, we can turn up the vocals in just the headphone of the vocalist. But if our guitar player doesn't want to hear the vocals very loud because they're not friends or something like that, then the guitar player can say, hey, I don't want to hear any vocals in my headphones, and we can turn the vocals down just for the guitar player. That's called a headphone mix, when we have a different mix for different people. All right, and we would put that here. This is our foldback. Whoops, why? Foldback, send, mount. And this raises or lowers send to the musician headphones, like that. Okay. Cool. And it doesn't really tell you that here. Number 9, it gives you like this weird answer here. The auxiliaries A and B are identical in operation to the others, but can be individually switched into the short fader path, which is technically true, but it doesn't really give us an example of what they're for, except over here. If you read this part of the manual here, auxiliaries A and B work in the same manner as the other auxiliaries, but are intended mainly for use as sends to the foldback system. So they can be used as your normal auxes, but they're intended to be used for your musicians' headphones. Over here we have an EQ. On every channel there's an EQ. Let's take a look at this EQ. In the EQ, first, the most important buttons on the EQ are number 1 and 7. In basically is a fancy word for on. Okay, on. Turn them on. Now the reason why it says in is because when we turn them on, we're going to put them into the path. And you can see here on the on this worksheet, I took all the lettering out, so you can't see what they are because that would just make it super easy. But basically, number 1 and 7 are the same. This you can say it's the EQ in, and what that means is it basically turns on the EQ. Boom, turns on the EQ. And you could even get a little bit more specific. This one turns on the high or low EQ. There we go. There we go, like that. Turns on the high frequency, low frequency EQ. And number 7 is basically the same. This is the mids EQ in. Turns on the mids EQ. Like that is a good enough answer for me. Just shows me that you know what it's doing. Now, keep in mind, the EQ has a lighter background. So the lighter background means it's on the short fader. It means it's on the monitor path. And so we're not EQing the input path, but if we want to EQ the input path, we can put it on the short fader by pushing the short fader button. It just puts the EQ into the input path. So that's what we would put here, number 2, short fader button. Say inserts the EQ into the input path, like that. And if you look down here in the what it says in the manual, it places the high frequency, low frequency equalizer in the SF short fader signal path where it can be used to treat a signal before it is recorded. Okay. Now let's go over here to number 3. This just changes our shelf setting where the EQ is happening. Just changes that there. The manual is on. It's on your. It's in the modules. It's right here. Wait, where are we? Right here. And everything is usually in here. If you just take a close look, I hope everybody will go ahead and just take a close look at this stuff, because it's really important that we look at this and just take a good look at it. But here it is right here. It's in the handouts here. Audient Manual is right there. So you can download that. I highly recommend it. And I mean, you're going to need it to do the homework assignments in a little bit here, or not the homework, we're going to do it in class today. But you're going to do it in groups, so it should be a little bit easier. Y'all can work together in groups. All right, so number 3 here is it switches the frequencies, and number 4 is our gain for that frequency. So this number 3 here switches the frequencies, and it turns the frequency up or down. That's number 4 and 6 do the same thing. Number 9, 10, and 11 are the same as numbers 12, 13, and 14, but just with different frequencies. So number 9 here adjusts your frequency in your mid section. Number 10 adjusts the gain. And number 11 adjusts the bandwidth. Now the bandwidth means wider or narrower, and we're going to talk about that later on. Number 12 is the same thing, just for the low mid frequency. So here it adjusts your frequency, here it adjusts your gain, and here you adjust the bandwidth. Staffo. All right. Cool. This one here is our short fader. So we can see here's the short fader. And the short fader, number 1 is just a indicator that shows whether the mic line or tape input is selected on the short fader path. Okay, no problem. Thanks for letting me know, Staffo. Only one will be illuminated, and it can be changed by using the flip switch. So you can flip it to the short fader or long fader here using this flip switch right here, number 2. Okay, but that's specifically to the short fader. And really, I don't really recommend getting into this too much, because it's going to just start making things a little bit confusing. But why it's set like that is so that you can have more customization of the board, so you can use it in a few different ways. Everything is an input on here. You have 2 sets of inputs per path, per channel, the input path and the monitor path, but they can both be being used at the same time, and we can see different ones in front of us in different ways. And that's what this is doing here. So I don't want you to get too hung up on these here, because they're not something I encourage people to use in the beginning, because it does make things more complicated. So I really don't expect you to use these very much right now. Number 3 here is our pan knob for the short fader. So if it's on the input path, that's going to pan it right there. Number 4 is the mix button. What this button does, this button is very, very important. This mix button, it sends the signal to the mix path. So it's our left, right, the stereo mix bus here. So it routes the signal, short fader signal to the stereo mix bus. It is good practice to unroute any channels which are not needed. This will reduce mix amp noise. So essentially with this mix button, what you do is if you want to hear your input path just to test to make sure it's okay before you're recording it, then you can push this mix button and you're going to hear it through your main speakers. But you don't want to keep this on all the time because you're going to see right here there's another mix button on the long fader. The long fader, which is our monitor path, has a mix button right here, number 3. And number 4 over here on the input path, the short fader, is our mix button as well. And these buttons both do the same thing. They send the signal to our left-right mix bus, our stereo mix bus. And so we want to make sure that they're not both pressed at the same time, because if they're both pressed at the same time, things are going to sound weird. And when you try it out for yourself, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's the type of thing where you got to hear it first to understand it. Here's our fader. This just is the level amount, signal, short fader signal. Then we have a solo button and a cut button. Cut is basically a mute button. So I'm just going to put that over here real quick. Oh wait, where's it? Number 7 is missing here. That's funny. Okay, so I guess you don't have to worry about it. All right, and then we go over here to the long fader. Oh no, it's right here. Sorry, number 7 is not missing. There you go, it's just down here. Let me just put that in here. Number 7 is the cut button, and basically this is essentially a mute button. It's the same thing. On some mixers they call it mute. On here they call it cut. It's the same thing. And then solo, this is our solo button. And this plays only channels that are soloed. So if you just want to listen to one sound or a couple sounds, you can solo them. Solo just means by itself. All right. Number 1 here this is on our long fader. This is our flip switch, and it basically does the same thing as over here, the source button here. So flips between the 2 paths, and this one here just indicates which one you're on right now, which path you're on. Number 3 is the mix button. We just talked about that. Number 4 is the pan. It's the same as the other one. It's just now we're on the long fader instead of the short fader. And the long fader, remember, is our monitor path, and the short fader is the input path. Okay? And number 5 and 6 are the same as they are on the other one, solo and mute, or solo and cut, rather. And this is just the fader. So it's just the long fader. And number 2 is our markings. Number 3 is the 0 dB mark, and number 4 is the infinity. So you're not going to hear any signal with number 4. Number 10 is going to be as loud as it can go, and number 3 is going to be unity. So that's what those are for right there. All right. So what I want to do now, just real quick, is let's take a 10-minute break. It's 10:35, 10:34. Let's take a 10-minute break now. And what I want to do is I want to meet up in Zoom, because I want to give you a couple hours to work on this assignment right here so we have time to do it in class, and we're going to do it in groups because I want y'all all to get it right. I want y'all to be talking to each other while we're doing it. So we're not going to come back to, yeah, Steph, it's okay. I think you'll be able to catch up pretty quickly, but yeah, definitely I'm going to put this video up right now. And essentially what I want you to do is we're going to, let's just take a break and come back onto Zoom. So let me go ahead and stop this recording here.